Good. How's it going, everyone? My name's Dylan. I'm an alcoholic. Wow. It's a good feeling to be up here. I got to say thank you, Matt. I don't think you know what an honor it is to speak in front of this group for me. I just got to say, before we got here, my fiance and I were standing in our bathroom getting ready, and she said, like, the most encapsulating thing I've ever heard is, who would have thought you'd be doing this, right? And I said that to myself, who would have thought that I would be in front of a room of people telling my experience, strength, and hope and how I got sober? Because for pretty much the entirety of my life, I had no hope whatsoever that I'd ever be in this position, that I'd probably still be alive at this point, or alive to any measurable amount of time. So yeah, it's good to be here, and thank you everyone for coming. I guess I'll just start with my qualifications. My sobriety date's November 29th of 2023, so I'm coming up just on 2 years. I have every intention to get my chip here in a month. I have a sponsor who has a sponsor. I sponsor other people in AA. I've been through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's been quite the journey. So I grew up about 700 miles north of here in a town called Kingston, New York. One of those damn Yankees that you guys love so much. And life growing up it had its challenges. I had a loving mother and father. I had a stable household. I lived in the same house my whole life. My mom worked really hard to give us everything that she could, and my dad was a drunk. I can say that now because he's been sober for 13 years through the program Alcoholics Anonymous, and he's the one who introduced me to these rooms. But growing up watching my dad drink, and, you know, I don't want to sit here and paint the picture that I am an alcoholic because of my father's drinking. I don't believe that's the case at all. I think that I was genetically predisposed to have the disease of alcoholism, and whether or not I witnessed him drink, I would be in the same position. So my dad was the kind of drunk where he was present, but he was absent at the same time. My dad was old-fashioned. He never hurt us in any way, but, you know, if we acted out, we would be well known of it. But I remember being my dad's bartender pretty young, learning how to serve a beer the right way, probably around 5, 6 years old, and mix a drink around 8 or 9. So I was around that lifestyle, and I saw him having fun with alcohol. I saw the good parts of it, and for some reason, as I grew up, those stuck out a lot more than the times remembering him, passed out, not there, but not there. So growing up, my relationship to alcohol was a mixed bag, but ultimately, as I came up, I sort of came to the determination that I was never going to be like him, because I did eventually see what it did to my family, to my dad's marriage. We struggled a lot as kids. So I sort of had that mindset of that's never going to be me, right? I'm sure a lot of people's experience is really similar. That's not going to be me, dealing with somebody with alcoholism in your life until it sneaks up on you and you realize that it's got you in its grips. So as I started getting into my formative years in school, I started getting in trouble a lot. I couldn't stay out of trouble, it seemed like. I think most of all, I just wanted attention. You'd think being the youngest of 4 kids, I got all the attention in the world, but that was really never the case. I always just wanted more, right? I always like to say my jug of choice, my drink of choice was always more. I just wanted more of whatever I had, and whatever I had was never enough. So I would always act out, get in trouble in whatever way I could. It would be fighting at school, stealing from a young age, lying through my teeth. I got really good at lying at a young age, and that was probably a huge detriment to me as I got into my early adult life. And my first experience with and out of respect for the program at AA, I'm going to try to keep my substance talk pretty bare, but to be honest, I was a drug addict. Before I was an alcoholic, my first experience with substance was with prescription substances. My mother was prescribed anti-anxiety meds, and I got into those things probably around 12 or 13 years old. And I just vividly remember the experience of taking it for the first time. And all those adjectives that early alcoholics describe themselves with, right? I think the one-word phrase that you could say is uncomfortable in your own skin. I just remember all those melting away the second I took that first drug. And that was it. And that turnkey moment happened where I thought I'd found my answer to life. And that sort of drug on for a little bit of time. It wasn't too long after that where I discovered alcohol. It was the summer between 8th and 9th grade. I was 13 years old. I was young for my grade, and I remember this time. My parents were away at work for the summer. I wasn't doing much anything good with my life, and I had this buddy who had gotten kicked out of my private school, my public school that we went to a private school, and then got kicked out of that private school, came back to public school, because I surrounded myself with a real good crowd at a young age. And he had met these girls in Catholic school, and he hit me up one day and said, "Hey man, these girls want to hang out with us. Let's go over to your house." And I was like, "All right, I got to put on a good show for these people. What can we do? What fun can we get into?" So I went and raided my parents' liquor cabinet, thinking, I'd be the adult that I thought I was. And they came over. I remember sitting in a circle, and we had this bottle of probably the cheapest vodka that you could buy. And we started to pass it around, and they took a sip, pass it on, took a sip, pass it on. Then it got to me. And I didn't have that experience that a lot of people describe, where you take your first drink and you feel this warm, fuzzy feeling going down. It wasn't like that. I hated it. I hated the taste of alcohol. I hated the experience of drinking. But that 10 seconds after, that 10 seconds where it gave my stomach some time to settle and the effect started to take place, I found the legal way, the legal answers to all my problem. Not at that time for me. I was 13 years old. But I was like, okay, maybe there's a workaround for this. Maybe I could get a fake ID, even though I looked like I was, probably 8 at the time. So the storm started to brew from a pretty young age for me. And it just got progressively worse in a very short period of time. I'm sure you guys can tell, but I'm not much older, or very old at all. I'm 25 years old. I found my way into AA at 17, so things went downhill pretty fast for me. So after I first experienced my first drink, I was just going into high school, and I can't remember a time in high school where I went to school for a full week. I was so withdrawn from what everybody else's goals and aspirations were for me. I had none for myself. All I wanted to do was party, have fun, get drunk, and repeat. And the consequences weren't there. I mean, my dad was just starting to get sober in my life. My mom was busy raising 3 other kids. She really didn't have time for me, so there wasn't always a watchful eye. And I was able to get away with it for a while. So probably around my senior year of high school, this is after a slew of suspensions and expulsions and getting back into school. My last hurrah, thought it was a good idea to smoke pot on the way home from school on the school bus. It was 2 weeks before I was supposed to graduate. They didn't like that too much, so I got basically they told my parents, "Your son probably shouldn't show up to graduation. We want him out of our hair at this point. We don't want to have to deal with him as an institution. He should probably just not show up for the sake of it." And I did anyway. Everybody showed up to graduation in a suit and tie and long pants. I showed up in a Hawaiian shirt with gym shorts and flip-flops, halfway in and out. And there's photos of that as evidence. And it was sort of just that everybody getting ready for life, gearing up for this next step ahead for their huge potential. And I was just there for the fun, and I really had no goals after that. So after high school, I was told by my parents, you have 2 choices. You can start working and maintain a room in this household, and you'll have to pay for your rent, and you're going to be a functioning member of society, or you try to get your crap together and go to college. I chose option A at first, because I thought, I started working with my dad from a young age. He owned a contracting company up in New York, so I learned to hustle, and I knew I could make $1 if I worked hard. So I started that, and then quickly realized that I couldn't work hard enough to make the money I needed to party. So if I went to school and didn't have to pay bills, I could still work and party the way I wanted to. So I decided to apply and get into the most prestigious community college in the state, Ulster Community College. I think the acceptance GPA is heartbeat, and you're able to stand up straight. So I got into community college, no major declared, this entire time I had no care for what I'm doing. I'm not thinking any more than a day in the future, right? I live a day at a time now in a much different way than I did then. Back then it was just trying to stay alive for those 24 hours. So I got into community college, started taking classes, started getting into the wrong crowd again. And that was sort of my first experience of everything coming to a head. At this point, I was still really hard into the drugs and alcohol. It was the night before I had classes. I was hanging out at a friend's house. We were doing whatever we were doing. We were doing things that would have caused me to not be conscious for the next 48 hours, let me say that. And I guess everything that happened after that, I was told. I guess I woke up, what I had done is I woke up for class that morning, got into my car, went to go down a mountain road to get to school, and went 40 miles an hour straight on a 90-degree bend, and hit a tree head on, which saved me from going down a 50-foot sheer cliff, and that was it. That was sort of the wake-up call that everybody in my life decided to say, okay, there's something unignorable here that we have to do something about. And I did still take for granted how blessed I am to have had recovery be such a prevalent part of my life so early on. So many people, my father being in recovery. I had a really good friend pass away from an overdose when I was 16 years old. So his family had started an organization that my dad was really involved with, and the opioid epidemic hit upstate New York really, really bad. So it was there. The recovery was prevalent, and the resources were there. So when I got into that accident, that was my first real deal intervention like you see on TV. I got driven out to the site of my accident, and all my loved ones were standing in a circle with their letters, and then, crying and telling me how much they loved me. And I think that was the point where I really started to see the repercussions of my actions. And I felt that first little sense of empathy for what I was doing. But unfortunately, my alcoholism was not done with me in the slightest. At that point, I was given the decision, you can either go to AA and start to get sober, or you could go find somewhere else to live, right? The fork in the road started to get a little more severe at that point. So I took option B that time because I needed a place to live. My first ever AA meeting, I was 17 years old. It was the Young People's meeting, Kingston Young People's in Kingston, New York. And I just remember walking to that door for the first time and seeing that glimmer of hope in people's eyes. And it was surreal for me because I never, ever thought I could see people my age not partying and living a happy, joyous, and free life. So it was really eye-opening. Of course, like I said, my head wasn't in it. I hadn't made the decision. I hadn't accepted I was an alcoholic. So I decided I was going to do what I was going to do to save face for the people that made the decisions in my life at that point, and not much else. I was going to do the bare minimum. I showed up, still drank and got high in the background, and that lasted about 25 days, and then I decided I think I'd do better as a transient. I really think that a tent in the back of my beat-up O2 Saab is going to be the way for me to live. So I did that for a year. I slept on the quads of college campuses. I live next to a pretty big college in our hometown, and I would go out partying and just pitch a tent in the quad that night, sleep, wake up, and do it again. People's couches, the back of my car, wherever I would end up, I was basically homeless for a year. And through that time, I'd left out that I'd finished my one semester at community college, and throughout that time of being transient, I wasn't going to school. But I sort of got to a point where I was like, I know I have some potential to do well in school. Every time I applied myself in school, I did well, but that was a rare occasion. So I decided to apply for a four-year college, which I got into. The lowest acceptance GPA school in New York State, SUNY Morrisville. Pretty sure you needed a 65 to get in there, which I had at the time. So I'm telling you, big aspirations I had for my life at this point. Got into this college, and this was sort of the transition point, and I guess ultimately why I really clung to AA. This is the transition point in my life where I started to put the drugs down and really clung on to the bottle. It was college, people partied, people drank, and I'd found a fake ID at that point. So I had unlimited access to alcohol, and I became a daily drinker at that point. I wasn't up until this point, and then it just took me. I woke up, I couldn't do anything until I drank. I would shake and not go to any of my classes. And that only lasted probably about a year. So in that time, I got myself into some really risky scenarios, almost passed away a couple of times, went to the hospital. And this entire time, I know that my family is here and then they're there as a resource, but I'm just not willing to accept it. And I think that's really what I've come to learn in Alcoholics Anonymous. What got me here in the first place and what keeps me coming back every day is that ultimate fact that I'm an alcoholic, that first step. Like I mentioned in the beginning, that this wasn't something I could control, right? This wasn't something I could just put down. There's something that happens in my body. There's a physical allergy. There's this craving that I have that I was born with, and that at this point, going through my compulsive drinking, I was really starting to accept it. So I get towards the end of my 1-year term at this prestigious school. We could call it Harvard if you guys want. And then I get towards the end there, and I just barely crept my GPA up a little bit. Like, we'll say it was here, now it's here, right? And I realized that the degree I was going for residential construction at the time. I had come to the point where I was like, I could have just worked for my dad for 2 years and gotten to the same point that this degree was going to give me. So let me do something a little different. I applied to transfer to a school for construction management, which is ultimately what I got my degree in Delhi, New York. Second lowest acceptance GPA in the state. I went from lowest to second lowest. I hold that degree on my wall, man. I'm really proud of it. It took me 6.5 years to get that 4-year degree, and I fought for every bit of it. Once I had transferred into this school, things petered out, and I'm probably very lucky that I wasn't, once I got to that everyday drinker point, that wasn't a consistency up until I got sober, because I honestly wouldn't have made it. My body wouldn't have been able to tolerate it. And on top of that, I was just putting myself in the most dangerous situations you could think of. I was a sloppy, mean, violent, aggressive drunk, who mouthed off to people he shouldn't have, and probably would have gotten myself killed if I kept going. So I got to this, we'll say, final destination, college, right? It was the last stop on the road in my academic career. And I start to get in with a little bit better of a crowd. Throughout my life, I always surrounded myself with, it's bad to say, but people who were worse than I was, just to sort of give myself that leg up that I'm not that bad. But I got to this school and people actually took things seriously, and it was forced to look at myself and say, you're not doing something that everybody else is in life, man. You're falling short in a lot of areas. So I get here and I get in this crowd and I start to peter down on the drinking a little bit. And then, while everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, I start to sort of slip back into the wayside and start drinking again and showing up to class drunk again, and get reprimanded by the school again, basically told, you need to do something about this. So that was round number 2 of coming back into AA. This time on my own accord, and I think that's really what made all the difference. I found a meeting in town, and let me say, when I had first gone to AA when I was 17, I expected it to be 3 guys that are 85 years old sitting in a circle talking about their war stories. That was 100% what I thought it was going to be, and then I walked into a young people's meeting. This time I went to an AA meeting, and that's exactly what it was. It was 3 guys sitting in a room, like a dingy room, just talking about war stories, and this 23, 22-year-old kid walks in, absolutely broken, looking for help, and they took me right in. This guy Kevin was one of the old timers, we'll call him, who was going to this meeting consistently, and he took me right under his wing, man. He told me that I didn't have to do this alone, that he knew exactly how I felt, that it wasn't necessarily about having fun and sobriety at the beginning, it's about doing the work, and you need to do the work to get to that point. Because when I had gone to that young people's meeting, it was great and fun and everything, but there was definitely that lack of doing the work that I think I needed to get this. So I get in there, and I get to work. So that was probably maybe a 4 or 5 week period of doing the work, and then that little voice creeped back in, and it said, Dylan, you're not an alcoholic. You're 22 years old or 23 years old. What are you doing? The party's not over. You can control it. And at this point, we're coming up on my last drink. My last drink was a single drink of alcohol. It was half of a mixed drink, which was probably the most infuriating thing for me at the time. But what I needed to do is I needed to prove myself that I wasn't an alcoholic. And the only way to do that was to have this drink and not have another. So I opened this drink and I started to drink it. And the second I took that first step, I said, you're an alcoholic, Dylan. There's something that happens in my body where if I don't put this down right now and go to a meeting, I'm not going to be able to stop, and everything's going to fall down in front of me. And that was the point. That was my first step right there. I didn't officially do my first step with my sponsor. That was a moment between me and my higher power where I realized that I am completely powerless over alcohol and my life is unmanageable. And on that date, November 23rd, 29th of 2023, I started this journey. I should mention at this point, I had met a woman who I'd started to get involved with, and I had a habit of taking hostages in sobriety, while I was drinking. I always showed women just enough of a good side of me to get them involved, and then the monster came out pretty quickly. Same exact thing happened with this one, except she didn't put up with it. She recognized it for what it was. She had had experience with people who dealt with addiction in her family, and it was not going to fly with her. And there was something about this girl that I knew was worth holding on to. So while I did get sober for myself, I had a huge motivating factor, and it was this person that now I'm slated to marry next year and, get to spend the rest of my life with. But she was there for the good, the bad, and the ugly, and she stuck by my side. So I started my journey, and my journey in sobriety this time around has been, it's been amazing. I've moved down to North Carolina, 3 weeks sober. That was a whirlwind. If I wanted an excuse to the geographical, it was right there, but my head was in it. Moved down here, got a new job, started working, started going to meetings, had my sponsor, and was just consistent this time. I think consistency is key in anything in life, especially in this program. I've never heard somebody going back out and saying, oh, but I went to meetings every day, right? There's always that starts to slip away from the program, and that's where it starts to creep right back in. Excuse me. So some things that I think I've done differently this time around, and things that I'm proud of in this bout of sobriety that I'm going on right now, is constant contact with my sponsor, constant contact with my higher power, is daily meditation, whether it be 10 seconds or 10 minutes in the morning, just making that decision about my 24 hours ahead and to let it, my higher power lead through me, and don't let Dylan make decisions, because Dylan makes really bad decisions, and I've proven that to myself time and time again. Like Matt had mentioned when I first started speaking, I'm also involved in another group in the area, the Young People's Group. I sort of crapped on Young People's a little bit before, but I think it does amazing things for this program. Our mission at the Young People's Group in Moore County, which is Fridays at 6, is to open the door to young people in sobriety for the very same reason that I had mentioned before, is that I think the thought of the AA to young people is that it's the last stop on the road, and I think the thought should be that it's the first, it's opening that door for a new beginning. So we meet every Fridays at 6 o'clock. We'd love you guys to come out to the Wilder building. We got rid of the bouncer that checks IDs at the doors, so you don't need to worry about your age if you want to come in. We thought that was a bad look. It's been a really good experience, and it hasn't always been easy. Been through a couple things in sobriety so far that have tested me. I lost my grandmother, and that was, tough, but I knew I didn't have to drink over that. She'd been sick for a while, and that was sort of one of those expected things that was coming. But something that happened in sobriety that was really a challenge for me was I got fired from my job, the reason I moved down here. And I don't really talk about that a lot, but I was 100% and still tend to be this day the egomaniac with an inferiority complex. And to have something like that happen in sobriety, not for the reason of drinking, I made a really stupid decision that cost my company a lot of money. And they decided to let me go. It was a huge crush, and it really took a lot out of me. But that night that I got fired, I went to a meeting because I knew that there was only one place for me to go. It tested me. I ended up having to do the steps again after that, just because I needed to reevaluate really where I was at in my life. I'd gotten a little bit too high on my pedestal in a very short amount of time. And that's, I think, ultimately the checks and balances of this program are to keep us humble, right? To keep us in a state of humility, because that's really the only way to not start to slip into our self-centered personalities. Being fired was tough. And like I mentioned before, I'm getting married next year. That's something big for me as somebody who never thought that they would make it past 27. I had this stupid notion when I was a kid that I was going to be in the 27 club, like I was on Jimi Hendrix level or something, like I was into old rock. But to actually have a hope and aspiration for my life, to get married and to have a family, it's a beautiful thing that I get to experience every day in this program. The friends that I've made are, I know, for a lifetime. I know that I'll hold them forever. We're planning on moving at the beginning of next year for work. Unfortunately, I got to leave so soon, but I don't plan on losing touch with anybody here, and I know that the hand of AA is wherever I go in this world. Just check on my time here. I know we blew through that. Might be a short one. I guess if there's anything, any message that I could give for somebody who might have been in my position before I recognized that I was an alcoholic, it's that the world is a better place with you in it. And if you think that you can control it and you're here, I hate to break it, but you probably can't. This is, nobody stumbles into these doors by mistake. And this program, right, is about attraction, not promotion. So if you're here, there's probably a reason for it. And keep coming back. That's all I really got, guys.